In the news, a vicar who says it's not always morally wrong to steal. He claims his aim was to attack greedy big stores for ruining small shops and damaging the local community. Today, people in his parish in St John's Wood in northwest London had this to say. Liz Wickham reports.
The Reverend John Papworth is no stranger to controversy. His latest comments that stealing from supermarkets isn't necessarily wrong reflect his particular interpretation of the gospel.
These people have set up these enormous establishments. They've put up an enormous barrage of propaganda to entice people to come in with the gospel of consumerism. Then, of course, people come in, they're saturated in their minds with ideas about getting more and more of this and that, and they wander out without paying. I'm not urging people to do this. I'm merely saying I don't regard it as morally wrong when they do.
His deacon insisted this was clearly not the view of the Church of England and that the commandment, "Thou shalt not steal," is an absolute one. And not surprisingly, the supermarkets too were unanimous in their wish to remind the Reverend of his religious tenets.
The 8th commandment says, "Thou shalt not steal," and he should know that better than anyone.
In St John's Wood, this is Liz Wickham for London Weekend Tonight.
I would strongly urge people not to steal in supermarkets because it's illegal, would get them into trouble. I mean, if you do it and do it habitually, sooner or later you're bound to be found out, you're bound to be caught, and it's not worth the candle. But what I am saying is that if you do walk out of supermarkets without paying, I'm talking about the big ones, of course, the giants. If you walk out without paying, whilst it's illegal, and I advise you not to do it, morally it has no more significance to me than if you're picking up seashells on a beach.
How do you come to that conclusion? On what are you basing it? Is it your religious beliefs?
They've killed the livelihoods of well over 70,000 small family shops up and down the country. And those family shops were an integral part of the moral framework, if you like, of countless local communities. And anything which weakens the bonds of community life can't fail to have a weakening effect on morality, because morality ultimately comes from relationships between people. And if the bonds between people are weakened or ignored or marginalized, then morality can't fail to suffer.
What do you feel about somebody coming to that kind of conclusion?
I think it was a pity that that priest made that remark, and I think it was damaging that he made it, and he shouldn't have made it. That said, of course, he was making a political statement. He was trying to draw attention to the fact that the presence of these vast supermarkets have ruined so many small local businesses, and that so much of business, major business, is built on a greed of one kind or another, and that also has to be taken into account. So he was making a political protest. I think it was a pity that he made that political protest in the way that he did, because whatever the wrongs of supermarkets, it is still wrong to steal.
How can you blame supermarkets for a disappearance in morality?
You know, we've got a multi-billion-pound advertising industry pouring up a tidal wave of lies upon lies upon lies to persuade people to buy and buy and buy, and to persuade people that salvation in this life is going to come from consuming more and more and more whatever is available in the shops or on the market.
But he is an example of somebody who's worked hard with his religious background, with his religious beliefs, and I believe he's a very religious man, and come to a conclusion. And then he's asking people to act on his conclusion. I mean, isn't that an example of precisely what you've been saying is what the moral process is?
The moral process does involve all of us struggling with issues of right and wrong, and trying to come to a conclusion. but sometimes people come to the wrong conclusion. And whatever the wrongs of supermarkets, we need to work on the assumption that there is a kind of respect for other people's possessions. After all, we certainly work on that assumption and the necessity of that assumption in small groups, in our families. I mean, in our families and with our friends, we work on the assumption that people won't nick our things. And indeed, we need that assumption. I mean, otherwise we would have no trust of anybody. We'd be watching out for everybody the whole time. We'd be guarding our things the whole time. And of course, we have to do that too much today in society. I mean, we have to be very, very careful because we do live a society where respect for other people's property is much less adhered to than it was in the past. But at any rate, with our friends, we can trust our friends not to nick our things. On the whole, we can trust our families not to nick our things. And I think that basic assumption that we can trust other people is fundamental.
Why should people be so worried about the command, thou shalt not steal? And the answer is that if you steal from your neighbours, that's a sin, that's wrong, as well as illegal, and you shouldn't do it on any count whatsoever. But when you take things from the supermarkets, you're not taking things from your neighbour, you're taking things from an institution devoted to the worship, not of God, but of mammon. And for the life of me, I can't see there is any moral consideration attached to it.